It is the 20th year in a row that we've seen these quarterly inflation reports come out, and it seems to send some mixed messages, also perhaps a departure from form, would you say?
Well, things are changing in the world, as we've seen. I think well, not surprise, we knew they'd probably have to revise up their inflation forecast, but even in 2 years' time, as you say, if you look at the numbers and draw the line, it looks like it'll be around 2.3% in 2 years' time. Now, that is above the inflation target, and it's really because growth is so low that they're letting that happen.
So he's more or less saying, despite the fact that a lot of people there on the MPC have been rather hawkish, some might say, up until the many rounds of quantitative easing that the UK's had over the last 2 years, we're going to more or less sacrifice inflation for the benefit of growth.
I think they're looking, what they call looking through inflation. Now, inflation has been very sticky in the UK on the upside, and the Bank of England has had quite a poor record in forecasting inflation, have usually been too low. But this time they increased their inflation forecast, which is, unusual, but actually their growth forecasts were lower. And so now everyone, it's not just the UK, but, other countries were looking to stimulate their economies.
That's right. So the UK is under pressure to try and inflate its way out of its own debt bubble, if you like, as well, and to try and stimulate to boost growth, so they can't be caught short. But we obviously have somebody else taking up the reins at the Bank of England, and he seems to be rather keen on perhaps temporarily abandoning that 2% inflation forecast. Would that be something that you'd agree with, Bronwyn?
Well, I don't think abandoning is probably what he said. He certainly looked at some different ways, whether we do what he calls nominal GDP and all sorts of other things. But I think he's not really looking to shelve the 2%. But I think what every policymaker now is looking at is for flexibility so that they can get the economies growing. Now, huge amount of money being pumped in by the Bank of England into the economy in form of quantitative easing, so buying bonds, pumping money in. They're not doing any more of that at the moment, and the reason for that is because inflation's still high. Other countries are still pumping money in.
Well, obviously, inflation and quantitative easing mean completely different things to you, depending on where you are in the investment and saving cycle, where you are in the work cycle as well. With so much inflation out there, do we have any evidence that the quantitative easing is actually going to work, given the fact that inflation will bite certain people who've saved up hard for some time to come?
Well, I think you have to be careful here. In the UK, inflation is sticky on the upside, so that's something that's structural in the UK economy. But the Bank of England's also put in place this funding for lending scheme, which we hope will help get, the cost of money down, and that does seem to be working, so that will help. But their hands are a bit tied at the moment, and it'll be interesting to see what the new governor, Mark Carney, will do about that, because, they can't really pump more money in because of the level of inflation. So they might do what perhaps the US has done and go for something like guidance, which, will look at...
And he's floated that idea, hasn't he? Perhaps looking at the unemployment figures as the Fed does. There's a lot of debate about whether guidance towards certain economic statistics is actually worthwhile in the long run, isn't there?
Well, I think one of the problems is that the whole of the Western world has very low growth. We've had a lot of policies, quantitative easing being the most obvious one, which are just, new. No one's really used them before, and there are always unintended consequences of that, and it's possible that that could mean higher inflation everywhere in the Western world going forward, but we don't know yet.